The Exalted Rework, arguably the hottest topic right now in Warframe besides the new Coda weapons. In this video, we will be going over all the frames that have Exalted weapons. I will be doing an overview of the Exalted weapons themselves and not necessarily the frames unless I mention something specific to help with the Exalted weapons. So if you come to this video to look for frame builds, this is not the case. This guide is focused mainly on the Exalted weapons, so please keep that in mind. I do want to pick a few frames and make full guides of them, like Baruuk and Atlas in the near future, but for now, please understand that it's only going to be the Exalted weapons here. The reason I chose to do this was because there are so many different ways to build frames themselves that it would just drag this video out longer than it needs to be, so that's why I decided to stick with just the Exalted weapons. Alright, we have 18 frames to cover, so let's not waste any time, shall we? Let's just do a brief overview on what the Exalted Rework is, so I don't have to explain it with every frame. All frames that had pseudo-Exalted weapons previously have now been turned into an actual moddable Exalted weapon. Frames like Ash, Atlas, Khora, and Gara. A quick disclaimer, in this video, the frames I just mentioned I will talk about a bit more since they've pretty much been kind of fully reworked, whereas many other frames in the list already had Exalted weapons and just got an extra arcane or new mods to go with it. So I will be brief with some and a little bit more in depth with others. All Exalted weapons now have an option to have arcane slots, which is probably the biggest change to these Exalted weapons. Excellus mod slots on primary and secondary Exalted weapons are now a thing, and your Acolyte, Amalgam, and Melee combo counter mods are now enabled for Exalted weapons. This means mods like Blood Rush, Weeping Wounds, and so on all count on Exalted weapons. And in case you haven't realized, this is huge for all Exalted weapons. It is a massive change. They have all received a huge buff. Here is a screenshot of the mods now available. One more thing that has changed is Bladestorm, Landslide, Shattered Lash, and Whipclaw now have a new ability combo system specific to these Exalted weapons. This was based off of Atlas's existing combo mechanic. Recasting their respective abilities within 5 seconds of the previous cast will grant you 20 combo points, which will increase your combo multiplier by 1. The combo counter has now been increased from 4x to 12x, and your damage will scale with this based on how high your ability combo counter is. Your ability damage now scales 1-to-1 with this new combo multiplier instead of the previous 0.25. Alright, now that you have been caught up to speed, let's begin. First on the list we have Excalibur. Damn, let me just say, I've never been a huge fan of Excalibur, but the Exalted Rework definitely made him shine a bit more. So why did Excalibur get so strong after the Exalted Rework? Well, with the rework, Excalibur's Exalted Blade can now gain melee combo counter from your ranged melee attacks or your waves. And with each hit per wave, it will count towards Tenokai as well. The projectile speed of your Exalted Blade is now faster, and Slash Dash now scales with mods equipped on his Exalted Blade. This all sounds great, but if you make use of Chromatic Blade, his augment, which changes your Exalted Blade status type by changing Excalibur's emissive color, and will also increase your status chance by 300%, which scales with ability strength. Now that we have arcane slots, melee influence, once again, mod your blade with something like gas, and you simply have damage that looks like this, which is absolutely disgusting. I did try this on my Excalibur Umbra, which honestly this boils down to which Excalibur you want to build this one on. But for the Umbra, there's obviously Umbra Former, so I use these mods on Exalted Blade. The framework is just put Chromatic Blade on your Warframe, mod for some strength and some survivability, change your emissive color to a blue so that your Chromatic Blade does electricity, and then you mod for flat crit and gas on your weapon. This is the Umbra build for the blade, and of course this depends on what Excalibur you have, so just follow the framework that I mentioned if you don't use Excalibur Umbra. You don't need to only do melee influence, you can maybe go for a full Tenokai combo stacking setup, which would probably do a ridiculous amount of damage if built correctly. Let's be real though, melee influence is the best option here. Up next we have Valkyr. Nothing really has changed besides the fact that you can have an arcane and of course new mods. I have dabbled a bit in an affliction setup, and it seems that the only way for this to work is a heavy attack slam or just a normal heavy attack. The slide attack doesn't lift enemies at all, so it's not really the most viable option. However, once again, melee influence is the way when it comes to claws or just any melee at this point. Stacking Weeping Wounds, since Valkyr's talents have really low base status chance, like really low. Slap on Voltaic Strike. I did opt for Galvanized Reflex to stack up combo easier and constantly keep up that 5x combo, although this is completely flexible, it's just a nice insurance policy. With this build right here, you can slide attack till your heart's content and give yourself Carpal Tunnel. It's really up to you. You can of course opt for other melee arcanes for Valkyr. I would imagine Exposure and Duplicate would work quite well. Or you could use Melee Vortex with the Magnetic mod and pull enemies in, if that's an option you'd like to try. In terms of the augments for Valkyr, this is up to you. I did go for Warcry Augment Eternal War. Up next we have Mesa. Mesa's regulators have always been pretty good at Star Chart and Base Steel Path, but she requires quite a bit of investment to push these babies further into endurance runs and so on. But it definitely can be done. With the new arcanes added, this has definitely helped scale her damage by a considerable amount. There are so many options to build her regulators now. The main arcanes I found to work are Flare, Fortify against overguarded enemies, and Merciless. All the other crit ones and so on do somewhat work, but if you're looking for flat damage, then these three work very well. But it's not limited to these, of course. The new Hot Shot arcane works incredibly well. Mesa also benefits heavily if you build her regulators for corrosive heat and then slap on Tau Forged Topaz shards to increase your crit chance with heat procs. And putting arcane velocity on Mesa herself is also good for more fire rate. There are so many helmets and builds to use regulators with, so these are really up to you. But from my initial testings, this build here definitely feels nice with flat damage. You can make Mesa's regulators do red crit damage if you really want to spec into that. Me personally, it gets quite expensive with the min-maxing setup, and also you do more than enough damage as is, it's overkill. Up next we have Ashe. I just make a guide on him. If you would like to go and check that video out, I go more in depth on his exalted builds and so on, as well as his builds. Ashe is one of the pseudo-exalted that was converted into a moddable exalted weapon. His shadow clones now have a weapon that will allow you to do some disgusting damage when built correctly. There are two really good ways to build Ashe's exalted weapon. The Silence method, increasing your finisher damage with Savage Silence, and then Wrathful Advance. Both do more than enough damage as is, but I know many people are opting for the Wrathful Advance route, which guarantees red crits on your shadow clones, which is just neuron activation. Build your Shadow's clones for more finisher damage and flat damage, a bit of attack speed and crit damage. Then you can use melee exposure, duplicates if you'd like, or another melee arcane that tickles your fancy. People also opt to put crescendo on the actual melee and then put a different arcane on the exalted weapon, so that could work too. Remember, the clones now scale with the new ability combo counter multiplier, so using the Rising Storm augment will allow you to stay at 12x combo much easier, maximizing your damage. You can also make use of red Archon shards for more melee critical damage, or you can run violet shards that increase your melee critical damage when your max energy is over 500. This will double. These are very good, but can be expensive, and if you want to really push the damage even higher, you can use Tau Force versions of these. But of course, this is high investment. You do more than enough damage as is. I personally haven't done any of this because I feel like there's no need. You one-shot everything anyway. But I know we all like neuron activation, so finding big numbers is what we're all chasing. Up next is Khora. Khora is another frame that was switched from the pseudo to an actual exalted weapon. And let's just say, yeah, this is quite powerful. Her Whip Claw now scales with range mods like Reach. Whip Claw now uses the same ability combo counter mechanic, and the base damage has been dropped from 300 to 150 for balancing purposes. Wrathful Advance on Khora is a good idea. I have briefly tested it, but I haven't fine-tuned the actual Khora build yet. I did use Accumulating Whip Claw to scale the damage as well. And for the Exalted Whip Claw, oh boy. Okay, so you can opt for a melee influence setup as per normal, but I mean, come on. Every exalted melee and melee is always just influence. It's getting a bit tiring now. The build would look like this. However, if you mod for Toxin on your Whip Claw and equip Archon Continuity, it will also apply Corrosive. Now, Melee Afflictions works on Whip Claw even though it doesn't really knock enemies down. And in pretty much one hit, you can have almost a full stack of Corrosive and a bunch of Toxin procs that do a ridiculous amount of damage. Like seriously, these Toxin dots do stupid damage. This is quite a fun way to play since you have red crits from Wrathful Advance and then you scale a lot of status effects with afflictions. There is also a melee exposure version, which is pretty generic, but you have increased corrosive damage scaling, so it's always good. And you can also make use of the melee crit damage archon shards to push this even further than before. But yeah, Khora is doing pretty well, I think, after this rework. And remember, the damage scales even more with your combo counter scaling. So it's ridiculous. Like, yeah, it's crazy. Sight 09. Nothing much has changed with Neutralizer, his exalted weapon. Just the fact that we get arcanes now. Realistically, Deadhead is just the perfect fit since we get more flat damage and a headshot damage multiplier. I haven't really dabbled in anything else since Neutralizer does so much damage as is. Here is a setup I used for his exalted. You can switch out bladed rounds for sharpshooter mod for energy sustain. A small increase to Neutralizer, nothing crazy, and that's pretty much it for when it comes to Sight 09. I don't need to talk much more about him. Sevagoth and his Shadow Claws. The Claws have received an arcane slot, which allows us to make use of melee influence. You can put on something like Gas or Blast. I did use Blast for the memes, and it's crazy how good it is, especially since your Shadow's first ability pulls enemies in, allowing you to hit multiple enemies at once, and it just pops groups. It's super satisfying. Here is the Claw build. We run a triple galvanized setup. Super fun for those of you who are a fan of Sevagoth Shadow and want a nice little upgrade to their setup. Up next, we have Wukong. I'm not the biggest Wukong player by any means, so I'm not sure if people still use his exalted weapon, but once again, a melee influence setup is ridiculously strong. I'm not a Wukong expert by any means. I did subsume Rifle Advance onto him and got free red crits with Neuron activation, and it works pretty well. There are probably better builds out there, but Project Wukong is coming this year, so yeah, it's going to be interesting. I did test out Afflictions and it doesn't work as well as I'd hoped, but that's pretty much all I have for Wukong. Next, we have Baruuk. He was the one frame out of all of the reworks that I was the most excited about, and I will make a separate guide for him. I love Baruuk, and after this rework, he is even better. Baruuk's waves now gain melee combo counter and trigger Tenakai. This alone is just such a huge difference in quality of life, it's unreal. Baruuk's wind waves now benefit from condition overload, and now we have arcanes. We will of course make use of his augment reactive storm. This is the main thing for our build here. I would recommend running Arcane Fury and Arcane Strike on Baruuk himself. With the addition of melee arcanes and the new mods, the damage from Baruuk is simply disgusting. Here is a melee influence setup if you like that, but I personally prefer the melee afflictions build instead, as the slide attack lifts enemies and your toxin procs do stupid damage. I mean, it doesn't even have to be toxin, it could be any damage over time status effect, but it's ridiculous how much damage this setup does. You can also run exposure or vortex if you prefer something different. Baruuk just got a massive upgrade. If you haven't played him yet, don't worry, the guide is coming soon. Before we go further, if I could ask you smash that like button, it really helps me out with the video. Thank you so much, my lovely tenor. Also, let me know how you are finding the new Exalted Rework in the comments below. Dante didn't really change much besides Noctua getting an arcane slot. I'm pretty sure it did have an Exodus slot before. I actually cannot remember, to be honest with you. All I did was add Cascadia Flare onto it and slapped on a ton of fire rate with Arcane Velocity on Dante himself to get even more fire rate. The thing is, I don't really know of many people using Noctua that much. I imagine you'd rather use the Grimoire, but for those of you who do, this is one of the many ways you can build this weapon. You cannot go wrong with corrosive heat. The damage increase from Cascadia Flare is always a welcome bonus. Up next, we have Gara. Gara is one of the frames that had a pseudo-exalted weapon changed to a moddable weapon, which is now called Shattered Lash. Now, let me just start by saying that Gara is the epitome of remove that cardinal direction. It is insane. She deletes everything. Shattered Lash now has a critical chance of 20% and a crit multiplier of 2x, with a status chance of 30%. Its base damage was reduced from 800 to 400. The range was increased from 10 to 12 meters, which can be increased with the reach mod, and also its sweep radius has also been increased to 1.75 meters. Shattered Lash also scales with the new ability combo counter mechanic, hence why they dropped the base damage. With this rework, there are quite a few ways you can go about modding Shattered Lash. Firstly, Shattered Lash has two different modes. The Puncture Lash, which is the puncture attack essentially, and the arcing swipe attack. I do recommend you switch your settings to inverted so you can tap to swipe enemies. Now, there are many ways to play Gara, but my favorite way is making use of the swipe attack. It's just super satisfying. You can't go wrong with it. The puncture attack does a whole bunch of puncture status chance, so you can actually make use of melee ability with the weeping wounds to seriously scale this arcane, allowing you to have ridiculous critical damage multiplier scaling, like upwards of like 18 times plus. Even though the swipe attack does slash, melee ability does still affect the swipe attack. It is, in my opinion, the perfect fit, and it's quite strong. Afflictions works as well, since the swipe attack literally swipes enemies across the screen, basically ragdolling them, so it is a very powerful option. I did opt for gas with the setup. It shreds everything. And then you can get away with a melee influence setup as well if you like that playstyle. Gara has received a big buff from these changes. She was strong before, but I feel like this is a nice quality of life increase. Ivara has received somewhat of a decent buff for her Artemis bow, since you can now make use of longbow sharpshot, which is definitely a huge difference in damage when it comes to using concentrated arrow. I just made an Ivara guide. It was in fact the first of the project series, so if you would like to go and check that video out, you can learn more about Ivara. This is the Artemis bow build for concentrated arrow. Temple, I've just made a video on. This is the build right here. I found Merciless or whatever works really well. It's pretty flexible, to be honest. I found gas to be the most satisfying when it comes to Lizzie, but it's not limited to this. You can really build Lizzie for anything. Hildryn has definitely seen an increase with Balefire, especially with the Aegis Gale augment for Aegis Storm, giving Balefire an alt-fire option. Corrosive Heat, alt-fire on the Aegis Storm with Flare, and you are shredding everything. Do remember this is optional and you can build around other arcanes too. Here is the build that I mainly use. There really is a common denominator here for weapons. Cascadia Flare, just melee influence, and it's just sometimes it is what it is. Garuda. Her exalted claws only show up when you don't have a melee equipped. Her claws are pretty decent, to be fair, like most claws in this game. A melee affliction setup with something like Toxin or any other damage over time status effect with her innate slash is disgusting damage over time against single target enemies. Or you can mod for melee vortex as well, or influence if you'd like. These are some nice options for the select few that use Garuda's claws. And with Blood Rush, you can get some nice red crits too, which is always satisfying. Atlas is next up on the podium for the new exalted weapons and the new ability combo multiplier scaling. The One Punch Man is even more one punchy with this rework. His fists crit chance has increased from 5 to 35%, and the status chance from 5 to 15. The ability combo mechanic actually originated from Atlas himself, and they have just adjusted it for the other frames to scale to 12x combo multiplier. We have increased attack radius of landslides. He has a 3-punch combo to 4 meters, 6 meters, and 8 meters respectively. This can be changed with mods like Reach. The boulder attack from Atlas Rumble to Augment now scales with mods equipped on his fists. Your energy is still reduced with each hit of landslide, allowing you to do a chain of punches. In all fairness, his damage before the rework was insane, and it is still insane. You can now just have the option of melee influence, so instead of hitting a few enemies, you now hit a bunch more. I do think influence is the best option here, or you can go for a gas affliction setup, which is incredibly fun. Yeah, I would say Atlas has received somewhat of a buff, not necessarily in direct damage, but more of these synergies that come with the arcanes. Also, subsuming Nourish onto Atlas will drastically increase your damage, and your ability damage will scale with the ability combo counter mechanic. So overall, it's just very big damage with Atlas. Jade also received a small change, and all I did was add Flare onto her glory, since Corrosive Heat is the way, or you can just change it up to what you like. I don't have much more to say about Jade. And finally, we come to the last frame on this long list, Titania. Titania has 2 exalted weapons, her pistols and her melees. I did dabble a bit with her melees, and they really do suck. I tried. Maybe you can make it work with better investment, but just by themselves, they really not it. I was hoping an influence setup would magically make them better, but that's not the case. What I can say is the addition of the arcanes for her pistols is definitely a huge boost in damage with Cascadia Flare. You can also go Fortify and possibly Galvanize Shot with an Encumber setup, but just for raw flat damage, Flare is the comfiest option. Definitely a decent damage boost for her pistols, and also provides you to free up Hornet Strike for something else. So for the Titania mains out there, you are definitely smiling. Okay, That concludes all 18 warframes that have exalted weapons. The more notable ones would be Ashe, Gara, Atlas, and Khora, as they had the pseudo-exalted weapons switched to actual exalted moddable weapons. Some has minor adjustments, some have received a massive buff like Excalibur and Baruuk, while others just received a slight damage bonus from the arcanes. Overall, this change has opened so many doors for quite a few frames and is overall a nice update to the game. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, a huge thank you to our generous channel members. You guys are amazing. I appreciate your support so much. Okay, enjoy the new exalted weapons or mods, whatever it is. Bye.